Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Disciples Christian Church. We're very excited to give you all a presentation about what is really going on at the border. You know, we hear so much in news, and I'm not sure if y'all know this, but news is designed to be sensationalized. So there's a lot that is and isn't true, and so we're hoping that we can just give you all a lot more information about the border. And I'm Reverend Mary Heath. This is my congregation, and we have the privilege of having Dr. Reverend Kathy McCallie with us here, who is a professor at Phillips. She's the Associate Professor of Christian Leadership and Ethics. Did I get that close? Okay. And well, Kathy is the person who piqued my interest in immigration issues, long ago. I'm not even going to say how long ago. Kathy was my pastor, and her father took medical missions to Nicaragua. And I went on 3 of those trips with them, and I learned about Central American poverty and why people immigrate and why they would want to come to America and, you know, what their few choices are in life. And since that time, it's been a passion and a calling. Now, I will say that it is frustrating. It is a difficult calling. It's a difficult ministry to be in. It is sometimes fraught with politics and money. And the thing that I've always kept in mind is we aren't welcoming, you know, the bad guy at the border. That's not our enemy. How many of you all have seen that fantastic Superman movie, the last one, Man of Steel? And he's fighting, and they're fighting, and they're fighting. And then finally the general or admiral or cardinal, I don't know what, he's a military guy. And he finally decides that this alien from another place is not going to harm them. And he says to him, this man is not our enemy. The people at the border are not our enemy. They are our brothers and sisters. They are children of God. And for me, this is not a political issue. It's a faith issue. It's an issue of life. It's a humanitarian issue. It is an issue of human souls. And so for me, it's not political at all, and it's an easy choice to follow the gospel and not what society would have us do. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to the Reverend Dr. Kathy McCallie.
Thank you so much. And I'd like to begin tonight by reading a poem that was written by a Tohono O'odham leader. That is a Native American nation or people whose land I visited. And so one of their leaders wrote this poem entitled Walking the Desert. Begin early in the morning before the sun rises. But this means knowing your route, and you don't. Walk until mid-morning when the heat rises. Stop. But you're in a hurry, you can't stop. Find shade under a mesquite tree, a big cactus, a large bush. But you must keep moving and only longingly look at the shade you must pass up. Sit or lie down, restore your energy. But you can't spare the time, though your entire being aches to rest. Drink water, eat a little, don't make yourself sick with too much. But you don't have water or food. You ran out on the second day. The desert absorbs lost people. This was never the intent of the desert. I'm going to start by showing you a brief clip from a video. It's just about 5 minutes long, And keep in mind that part of the background for our conversation today is that there can be really challenging things involved in ministries at borders, but also some of the most rewarding and joyful and life-giving interactions that I've ever had in my life. There is big money at stake in the militarization of the border and convincing citizens that people on the other side are dangerous. And the high-tech industries that have to do with surveillance and the militarization of the border are things to keep an eye out for in this and other videos and slides that we'll show you tonight. So one of the people in this video that I'm about to show you is somebody I met and spent time with in Tucson, Arizona, and south of there just last October when I was with a class of seminary students from Phillips Seminary.
Mami, he tratado de todo. Da esa numeración y que manden el helicóptero. Aquí tengo 2 días tirado.
Por favor, se lo suplicamos, en usted también estamos confiando. Por favor, ayúdenos a saber alguna información de mi hermanito. Por favor, se lo suplicamos.
Tengo mucha hambre, ya no aguanto, me voy a desmayar. Que manden el helicóptero. Si no, mañana ya no amanezco, ya no aguanto.
In the last 2 decades, thousands of people have died trying to cross Arizona's southern desert into the United States. No one knows the true number of people who've gone missing, never to be heard from again.
Otro día más y mucho, otros 2 días, si yo ya no sobrevivo, ya no hubiera aguantado.
So when the U.S.'s approach to immigration is built on hostility and incarceration, who is willing to save migrants when the desert gets the better of them?
How close to death does a migrant need to be for Border Patrol to rescue them?
If we have an asset nearby that can rescue somebody, we will use that asset.
Civilian volunteers have stepped in when official efforts fail. But their ability to help has its limits.
Sir, you cannot do that. Please step back. They're under our custody.
It's nearly impossible to make this journey without a smuggler. But the thing is, they often mislead migrants about just how dangerous it is and charge thousands of dollars.
No es como le pintan a uno el desierto y todo. Sí es complicado.
This is Martin, a Guatemalan man who was stranded on the Babaquiviri Mountains for 3 days in February after he was abandoned by a smuggler. We've changed his name to maintain his privacy.
Cuando yo me quedé, lo primero que fue es encomendarme en Dios y en las manos de Dios, porque Dios es lo primero.
Temperatures dipped below freezing at night. His only shelter was a garbage bag.
Yo sentía cuando llegaban los coyotes hacia mí y me olfateaban y yo solo me enrollaba y se iba. Llegaban y se iba.
He called 911 for help, but as the hours passed, he wasn't so sure he'd make it. So his family reached out to some local humanitarians.
Hello. Hey, how's it going? Good.
Yeah. Are you guys Green Valley?
We got buzzed up there for time. Oh, really? Free BP at the turnaround. Give us a good look. Really? Damn, they're out in force.
Frontera Aid Collective is part of a small network of volunteers doing the dangerous work of searching for people in the desert. Arizona's Sonoran Desert is a vast, harsh wilderness that stretches across several U.S. states and Mexico.
Did you guys get a group out there or something? Oh, there's nothing going on? Okay, all right, have a good one.
David, Taylor, Scott, and Bryce all work full-time jobs, but they volunteer pretty much every moment of their free time to preventing people from dying.
If this bottle is encountered by other humanitarians, they'll know when it was dropped off.
They say groups like theirs exist because through a combination of policy and neglect, Border Patrol has systematically failed to save lives.
It's a very common thing that somebody will call 911 and the call will just go nowhere. In order to get some kind of help, and it ends up being these like private groups who will go out.
We'll never really know the actual number of people who've died out here because rescuers like Bryce and Taylor can only count the remains they find.
It's devastating. And I mean, not just for us. I mean, if the person is just left in this very remote area where their body will never be found, the family doesn't even know what happened. They can assume, but they never have that closure.
If a person is never found, this is most likely the end result. And it's why some migrants end up calling 911, even though it means they'll be deported.
Pues yo sentía que se me aceleraba el corazón y ya no daba más, no me dejaba respirar para yo poder seguir avanzando. Y así fue como yo me fui quedando y prácticamente me dijeron que descansara y que siguiera el otro día. Ellos prácticamente según me iban a esperar, pero ya no.
Hi, I'd like to make a report of a person lost in the desert.
What search and rescue team are you with?
I'm with Frontera Aid Collective.
Volunteers called in, emailed, and reported Martin's coordinates more than 40 times over the course of 3 days. But Border Patrol didn't rescue Martin. So aid workers went out on their own to get him. We asked the group to retrace their steps, and soon after, we spotted Border Patrol detaining migrants they'd found in the desert. We were about to witness firsthand why the relationship between humanitarians and Border Patrol can be turbulent.
A lot of the time,
to Mary to tell you a little bit more about some of her experiences recently in Texas. And she and I are going to kind of share stories about experiences in the at the Arizona border and the Texas border. And the terrain is very different. And it's, of course, the border's a long border crossing many states. So don't be surprised or confused that you'll be hearing about really different kind of situations in different geographic locations.
Okay, so that's perfect. Jordan, can you put up that map? Now, I had made a contact with a woman in Del Rio, Texas. And the reason why I contacted her was because there was a news story about how many immigrants were crossing in Del Rio, Texas, because it didn't have a wall across the entire area, they thought. So they thought. And because it's a low spot in the river. So Del Rio is up here. I know it's small. I hope you can kind of tell. Del Rio is that first X up there. And then, okay, so you can tell, as Kathy was saying, the border is a very, very long stretch of land just in Texas alone. Think how many people, how many rescues, how many officers we would need just for Texas. Let's just say we could throw any amount of money at it at all that we wanted to. I'm not sure still how we would have enough of the land covered. So Del Rio, well, in the previous administration's wisdom decided, hey, we better get out there and build some more walls. I'll tell you about that in just a second. Del Rio is actually a hub for several Texas border cities. Eagle Pass is one. You might have heard a little bit about Eagle Pass recently. There's another town called Comstock. There's another couple of little towns that when someone passes through, either they go over the fence, there's no fence, they swim the river, or tunnel underneath the fence or underneath the razor wire, whatever's there. If they are picked up in this area, the Southwest Texas area, from a little north of Del Rio down to a little south of Eagle Pass, they all get sent to Del Rio, Texas. That's if they're released. That's if they're released. So what happens in this area of Texas. And now I've been to Brownsville. Brownsville is the biggest port we have. That's the southern tip of Texas. And not long ago, actually it was last summer, one of our ministers is in Brownsville. He's been there for over 40 years. Joel knows him. He's been working there helping people gain a new life in the US. When I was there, which was several years ago, and it was under a different administration, it was right after the big stories about families being separated. So I go to this huge port. There are huge humanitarian organizations there. There was one man who had been released and was able to get a ticket and go on to his final destination out of tens of thousands. Where were the rest? Private prisons and detention. That was a big story also, how much the private prison industry was making. So, in Del Rio, everyone who comes across, if they immediately give themselves up because they are seeking asylum, they are processed, they're picked up by Border Patrol, they're processed by ICE, and if they aren't found to be a danger, they are released and they're taken to Del Rio. So now Del Rio is again seeing lots and lots and lots of folks. There are some folks that still have the ankle monitors. They're released, but for some reason, ICE thinks that they might be someone to keep track of. A couple of years ago, I had a young couple come through Oklahoma City who had to check in with ICE because Oklahoma City was supposed to have been the city where they had a sponsor. Well, at the last minute, their sponsor said, no, I can't receive you. They had nowhere to stay, so they called me. I helped them find a place. It was a young man and a young woman in their early 20s with an infant, and he had an ankle monitor. So at that time, they weren't allowing anyone in except for what they considered a family unit. So a family unit was mom, dad, children, which is how we received our Congolese family that we sponsor. It was mom, dad, and 3 children. And this couple was mom, dad, infant. Well, her mother had come up with her from Cuba, but they would not allow her mother to come in. The mother was deported because that's not a family unit. And that's what the policy was at the time. And this is one of the problems that you have with immigration. The policies and the administrative orders and the rules, they change constantly. I don't know how anyone could keep up with it. So this woman in Del Rio, I contacted her because I had seen that news story and so many people were entering. And I kept a relationship going with her. She brought to us our Congolese family who did not have a sponsor in the US. Thank God they were brought to us. Now they are our family. And a couple of years ago, because of the family unit policy, they had tons and tons and tons of pregnant women coming across. And often it's pregnant women with children, and often without a father. And even if they came with their husband or the father of the children, sometimes he was detained. He was kept in detention while the mother and children were released. And it's really hard to catch up with each other at that point. So everybody in that area gets sent to Del Rio, Texas. When they show up on the bus, and we went to take clothes. So is there a picture of the car? Can you go to the car? Yeah. Okay, now see, that's my car. It's a mid-size SUV. And that entire car, the back seat, and I think we even had clothes underneath our feet, was full of coats and jackets and hoodies. And we gave out every last one of them. We were there 3 days, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, December 28, 29, 30. Is that correct? I think it was. And so in those 3 days, we saw 1,100 people. So the first bus shows up at 7:30. And actually, I want to make sure I give you, okay, we saw 1,172 people in those 3 days. Now, the first bus shows up at 7:30 a.m. 7:30 a.m. there, it's freezing. It's 32 degrees. The first thing they do is there's a slide that we're holding up a sign. Me and 2 other women are holding up a sign. It's later? That's okay. Oh, really? Okay, well, I thought I sent it, but. So the first thing they do is they get an orientation. And our director there, it's called Val Verde Border Humanitarian Coalition. Long name, great stuff. She has to give folks an orientation while they're on the bus from detention. And the sign says, this is your objective. Oh, the picture's out there, okay. And it is to get yourself out of there. Get a bus ticket, go wherever you have to go, meet up with your family, or everybody gets sent to San Antonio because there's an overnight shelter in San Antonio. Del Rio is not an overnight center. They give them some food and they give them the opportunity to charge their phones and make travel arrangements. Not everybody can do that. So when they are told, this is what you have to do today, you know, the people that arrive at 7:30 have plenty of time usually to make arrangements. Get on that last bus going to San Antonio. Get on the Greyhound bus to go wherever their family or friend is. Not all of them make that because sometimes the bus comes in late. There are women there at the Humanitarian Coalition who help them get on buses to San Antonio, but it costs. And it costs an exorbitant amount for a lot of these folks. Now, there is a free bus on the other side of the building where the coalition is. Those are state-run buses, courtesy of Governor Abbott. So, when the folks get off of the buses, we take off their wristbands and we cut off the tags that are on their backpacks or purse or whatever they have, and we give them breakfast. It's a prepackaged breakfast and it's awful. But there's not a way there to actually make a decent, warm breakfast for folks. One of the items in the breakfast was hummus. Most Latin people don't know what hummus is, and they certainly don't like it. I like hummus. I know what it is, but I don't want to eat it for breakfast. And there were a couple of other things in that box that Latin people, and all the people we saw those 3 days were from Colombia, Honduras, Guatemala, and Mexico. Well, they didn't eat the stuff that was in that prepackaged box. So they're still kind of hungry, and there's people with children. Children certainly don't eat hummus, you know. And then they have the chance to buy their tickets elsewhere. Then more buses come in. And as they come in, we do the same thing. We try to notice those who don't have appropriate clothes, shoes, socks, whatever, and get them what they need. But if they come in after 11 o'clock, they get lunch. The people who were there for breakfast are not allowed to have lunch. Rules, 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 more rules everywhere, rules. So they can only either have breakfast or lunch, depending on what time your bus comes in. And part of that is for the purpose of getting them out of there. Now, why? Go ahead. Right.
Say that over the mic.
Okay, so I'm glad, thank you for reminding me. The breakfast and the lunch was only handed out to adults. So if you had mom, dad, 3, 4 kids, you still only got 2 breakfasts. And that has to do with, you know, availability. They don't have, you know, food that will last forever. However, they know that they have volunteers like Patty and I who, when we noticed that their family had 4 or 5 people, they somehow wind up with another box or 2. You know, that's God's economics, not man's. God's economics is there's plenty for everybody. They didn't consider 13-year-olds and up adults. Yeah. Peggy? Oh, you wish you hadn't asked that. They came from another large organization, actually a global organization that I don't feel like really helps anybody. It's a very, very large global organization that mostly does disaster relief. So it was donated, and the coalition feels like it has to be given out. After the last bus comes in, and there are some people that decide to go on the free buses ran by the state because they don't have family or friends that can come and get them. They don't have money to go on to their next destination. And so they'll take the free bus. Now, lots of those people, the free buses that were there that week that we were there, went to Chicago, New York, LA, and Denver. 3 of those places were very cold places. And they were already in freezing cold weather. So when you see grandmas getting off the bus, they're in sleeveless blouses in 32 degrees and the little short pants, I don't know what they're called, the little short pants things. It just breaks your heart. And when you see people with toddlers and babies that don't have on socks, teenage girls, there's also another picture out there of a teenage girl, which all she has is a blouse, and she has a blanket on her from another large organization that I don't feel is very helpful. And she's wearing flip-flops. When have you worn flip-flops out in freezing or below freezing weather? She didn't have real shoes, so I gave her socks. And I tried to find a pair of shoes that fit, but we didn't have one. So she put the socks on under the flippies. There are people with their babies and their toddlers holding them out to us to put little socks on their tiny little feet. There are people that, are wanting gloves for their kids. And I have a list of these things that we just didn't have and that we need. So there's one of the helpers putting some little booties on a baby. And Jordan, go back to that picture right before that, those 2 young men, if you can. That was their winter clothes. The one man is in a long sleeve shirt. The other man has on another long sleeve shirt. But again, it was freezing and they did not have a coat or a jacket. They were wanting lots of hats, lots of shoes, lots of socks, things that would keep you warm. A lot of those folks will go on to cold destinations anyway. They need them. So at the end of the day, we tried to give out as much as we could at a certain time. Oh, look at this beautiful little boy. Now, I wish you could have seen his face when I showed him his picture, because that smile would warm your heart for the rest of your life. And he didn't have gloves or a hat, and he was wearing socks. He did have a little jacket. And so we made sure we gave him all that we could give him to keep him warm. His mom did not know if she was going to be able to leave. But they aren't allowed to spend the night. That's why the coalition wants to hurry up and get them out. If they are now, under this new Texas law, found there overnight, they're considered trespassing and loitering, which means now any Texas authority can arrest you, and that means you get deported. So the coalition didn't want people spending the night there, but some people had no choice. And there's a few pictures of how they were sleeping in the climbers on the playground and using boxes to keep the wind out. So that was our day in Del Rio. Now, Del Rio, since I said it was a hub, right? In December, they saw 13,511 people. That's a lot. For 2023, they saw 57,338 people. Lots of people that need food, shelter, clothing, lots of children that need food, shelter, clothing. And it, folks, it makes you appreciate what you have. When you look at your closet full of clothes and you say, I have nothing to wear. It's not true. You have a lot to wear, a lot compared to these folks. So a lot of people would ask for things like toothbrushes. Lots of the women needed feminine products. Of course, lots of people needed the baby mittens and socks, which we didn't have. When you only have one backpack for yourself, how much can you carry? Not much. Well, I have a picture up on our Facebook page of our Congolese family and their blue backpack that they had. They had 5 people in their family, but they actually had 2 backpacks. But you can't get a big coat and food and feminine products and diapers and baby wipes and. You can't get that in your bag. But most of these people have a Bible in their bag. I made room for that. So they have a lot of needs, a lot of intense needs. And then at the end of the day, when people were hopefully finding their rides to their next spot, we just had to lock up and go. The city will not let us be there later than a certain time. The city will not let it be an overnight shelter. And of course, the next morning when we arrive, there are people who had to sleep there in freezing weather without a lot of coats and blankets and beds and comforts. Now, the woman that runs this coalition is an amazing woman who is called to this. And she cares about those people very deeply. And so some of the rules to us at first sounded like, what? That's not okay, like the food thing and being very careful about giving out jackets and blankets and things. But when you know someone's life depends on getting the heck out of there because they might be deported again, yeah, you want them to go ahead and go on. Not having a kitchen, not having food to cook for people, it makes a difference. So it's both wonderful and it's both kind of frustrating. And it's not the coalition's fault, it's not their problem. They're not the ones that set up the rules, it's the city. They rent a city building. And even if it were a private building, they still wouldn't get a permit to be an overnight shelter. In San Antonio, there is an overnight shelter. But that's all they get to stay there. So I did do a little bit of, now Kathy said there's big money in this immigration stuff. There's big money in it. It's really frustrating. So this is, I hope you all can see it. So this is a Greyhound. Anybody who wants to can get on a Greyhound that can afford it. And so this was this morning. I looked this up this morning. This is what it would cost to leave San Antonio and go to New York City, which is where a lot of folks were going. A $400 to $365 ticket. Okay, and so where's the next one? This was also this morning. This is United, $244. Who's making the money? The bus lines. Why don't these folks just get on a plane? No ID. Okay, so the bus lines, I don't think really would want, you know, all of this shut down. They're making pretty good dough. Yeah. And this was from Del Rio, where we were. It's about the same price as it would be from San Antonio. So why would anyone want to pay? You had to pay $55 to go from Del Rio to San Antonio, and then you would have to pay from San Antonio to New York, $399. It's kind of a crazy system, but that's the system we've got. Sometimes none of it makes any sense. And when people were showing up in Del Rio, they would come to us and they would go, where am I? And we would say, well, you're in Del Rio, Texas. And they would say, where's that? And we would have to show them on a map because when they're put on the bus in detention, they're not really told where they're going. It's not a tour guide, it's not a tour bus, you know. They're put on the bus and they're sent where they're sent. And so we have to try, just imagine, if you didn't speak English and you were trying to figure out the bus schedule and trying to see if you or someone you knew had enough money to get you on that bus, how in the world could you figure out how to do all of that if you didn't even know where you started from the first place? So it's amazing what people are having to deal with. Now, on New Year's Day, our organization was closed, but detention did release people. So they did what they call a community street release. So people were released to the streets. They didn't have the coalition there for food and even a small amount of shelter or to recharge their phones, or they were just on the streets. So I remember I talked about I had been in Brownsville a while back. And not long ago, the only two acceptable ports was Brownsville and El Paso. And if you didn't come through one of those ports, you were immediately deported. And I don't know whose policy that was. It didn't last a long time. So there were a whole lot of people coming through in El Paso. Have you seen, a couple of months ago, did you see those stories? People just lined along the sidewalks of El Paso. Because if that was one of the only ports you could get to, if that was the closest place to you, that's where you went. El Paso did something about that. They didn't want that either. So imagine all of these border towns, nobody wants these people here. No one wants an overnight shelter on the border. No one wants them kept. No, everybody wants to ship them off, hurry up. Governor Abbott said, well, you know, if they want to enter the US and they need help with their travel plans, we are going to help them. Well, yeah, he does, in a manner of speaking. And some of the buses didn't want food on their bus. We saw one guy patted down because the driver didn't want food on the bus because, you know, your bus might get dirty. Okay. So it is a sobering, crazy kind of experience, but Kathy said, you wouldn't trade it for the world. You wouldn't trade the heartache of seeing these beautiful people go through this and being able to help them for anything. You know, again, we're talking about human souls. And some of these souls are infants and toddlers. And they don't have socks, you know. Some of them are just really fleeing for their lives. And we're going to talk more about that, why people leave, the different reasons for leaving. But in Del Rio, you know, thank God that coalition is there. A couple of church folks got together and said, we have to do something. But they're the only one in that area. It's a really big area. So that was just a few problems with Del Rio. And, you know, you've heard about Eagle Pass lately. Okay, well, they kind of fixed Del Rio, kind of. That's perfect, Jordan, thank you. Can you see? Back here is the old fence, big gap, new, taller fence. Is this useful? Is this really a useful way to spend our money? Is that helpful in any way? I don't think so. I don't think so. So when you're driving along this border street right here, I took a video, but I couldn't show it. It's blank space, really tall panel, blank space, tall panel, blank space. I'm like, who designed that? Who in the world would start building a fence like that with huge gaps in between? And we were just scratching our heads going, man, we're driving really slow looking at this fence. There's already a file on it somewhere probably. And it doesn't matter. The size of the fence, the height of the fence, the razor wire, it won't matter. Because people that have to get in to preserve their lives and their families' lives, they will. No matter how dangerous. Trekking through a desert on foot, climbing a wall, going under a wall. So hopefully, I don't know, I don't have the answers. We're going to talk later about what could be done better and are there any sort of, is there an answer to all of this? Maybe someone out there knows. So I'm going to give it back to Kathy.
A lot of times people say, well, why don't they just come legally? Is this going to be a problem if I'm down here? Is that going to mess up your recording? Okay. Well, people on Zoom can do it. Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. A lot of times people say, why don't these immigrants just come the right way? Why don't they just follow the rules and get in line and so forth? One of the things that I've learned is that even if you have a very strong case for asylum, somewhere between 7 and 20 years before your case will be heard. Right now, they're hearing asylum cases that were filed like 20 years ago. So if your life is at risk, that's not going to be an option for you. The other thing is, a lot of times smugglers who smuggle people, human traffickers, will tell people in these communities, if you just get to the United States, there's work there. And oftentimes in some of these communities, young people hear those kinds of stories and they don't have a way to evaluate that. So we've heard a lot of stories of people who will say, I got across the river or I got through the desert and I thought, oh, good, I'm here now. And I'm in the United States and everything's going to be okay. They do not know that there is the legal system that's trying to keep them out. So the quotas on people from different areas of the world do discriminate against Black and brown people. And if you want to look into all of the qualifications you have to come legally and how long it takes, you'll understand a lot more about why there are people who are coming out of desperation. We met a man in October who had just been in the United States a few days. He had crossed the desert. He was from Venezuela. He was 20 years old. He had been in the army in Venezuela, and he had sent a text to a friend saying something that was critical of his government. And his supervisor in the military came to his house that night and said, you've got to leave, they're going to kill you. And he left immediately and walked to the United States from Venezuela. So we heard lots of stories like that. In just the county that Tucson is in just that county, they have been keeping records of how many human remains they find in the desert just in that county. And it's between like 300 and 400 a year. Those are the remains they find. And they know that in the desert, bodies disappear very quickly because of the harsh conditions and also animals and so forth. So no one really knows exactly how many people die, but if you think of that as that's just one county, and then all of the expanse of the border with the U.S. and Mexico, there are a lot of people that are trying to cross. One of the actual policies that the government has that has been instituted over the last decades is called prevention through deterrence. And the idea is to make it so frightening and dangerous to cross that people are prevented from crossing. So where people used to cross often just to come and work and then go home, like 20 years ago, 50 years ago, there wasn't much of a fence, very many places, and workers went back and forth often. But as there's been more concern about this, the fences have been built up in the cities, the walls, the fences, the border guards, in the cities where people pass most frequently. And so it's pushed those who are crossing farther and farther out into the desert. And that's been actually part of the strategy, is to make it so dangerous to cross that people are deterred from doing that. So a couple of things. In the 1980s, there was a movement called the Sanctuary Movement. You may have heard of that. It was started by churches who were trying to support refugees and immigrants from Latin America, often being killed. If you've seen the movie Romero, you know about some of the revolutions in Latin American countries that were often funded by the US. So when people came fleeing those wars in Nicaragua, Guatemala, El Salvador, those wars, they weren't granted refugee status, immigrants refugee status, because the US wasn't recognizing their countries as countries that were persecuting them. Southside Presbyterian Church in Tucson, Arizona, was the church where the sanctuary movement started in the 1980s. They started sheltering people there, and Border Links is a nonprofit spinoff from that church. The church is a beautiful, if you ever get a chance to visit in Tucson, it's a beautiful place to visit and a real leader in the Tucson region for ministries with migrants. This is a sanctuary room in their church where a person lived for a few years because she was at risk of being deported, and the rest of her family, including young children, obviously didn't want her to be deported. And so she lived in that room, and the police kind of looked the other way because they didn't want to come into a church and get her. So there are modern day sanctuary churches, and that's one of the things that we experienced a lot when we went to Tucson. That church also has a day laborers program. And so every morning in their parking lot, there are 20, 30, sometimes 50 people, not all men, but mostly men, who show up wanting to work for the day. And contractors and people who need workers come by, and there's some support and regulation of this so that migrants don't have the experience of having somebody pick them up and say, I'll pay you $50 if you'll work for the day. Then they work all day and they don't pay them. So there are a number of really interesting kinds of things that are going on all across the borders. And I think it's so exciting what Mary and others have done, and the opportunities to connect with people who are doing other different things. One of the organizations I've been really inspired by is called Mariposas Sin Fronteras, which means Butterflies Without Borders. And it's an LGBTQ support, because we see a lot of migrants who come from Latin America who are bullied and even threatened with death in communities they're from, and they're seeking asylum based on their sexual orientation. And so that's another really interesting organization that we've met with. I think part of what's really important to remember about all this is there are a lot of people who, you've heard the saying, they didn't cross the border crossed them. And it hasn't been very long ago that Mexico included so much of the region where people are crossing. So ancestral lands, generations of families who live different places. There are lots of different reasons why the border is a relatively recent invention that's very problematic. So this shows the way that what used to be Mexico in 1848, and then around that time, different pieces, slightly different years, where Mexico lost that land and it became part of the United States. In Arizona and in that region, I mentioned earlier, I read the poem written by this Native American who is a part of this tribe, the Tohono O'odham. And part of what's interesting about their land is I think they're the only indigenous nation, tribe, that is on their ancestral land. They've never been moved because the desert land is so poor, nobody wanted it. But that's kind of interesting. What you're seeing in yellow there, that used to be their ancestral land. So that's a lot of Arizona, California. The red is what they have now. They still have 2.8 million acres. That's how big the red area is. So just think about how their land, their ancestral land was. But you can see that white line is the border of US and Mexico, and their land was just cut in half. And for many, many years, there was just, maybe there'd be like this concrete obelisk that said, here's the border between US and Mexico. There wasn't even a barbed wire fence, and people went back and forth all the time. And it's just been like in the last 50 to 70 years that they've started really building secure fences, much less a border wall. But I'll just tell you one more thing about the border wall that amazed me. They worked really hard, the tribe, to keep having one of those big fence constructions going through their land. But they lost that battle, but that's kind of what their land looks like. And so these big fences that, like that, and some that Mary showed you earlier, are being built across their land, but in the first year they were built, in one place, the water completely washed out the ground underneath, because the desert it's a harsh land. So they built that fence, who knows how much it cost, and now there's a gap for, about the size of a football field where you can just walk under. the fence. So, I mean, it does not make sense. In a minute, I'm going to show you just a little bit of an excerpt from this documentary called Immigrants for Sale that talks about some of the cash that's being made off the private prison industry. This is in the town of Nogales, also divided by the US-Mexico border. And if you want to go into Mexico there, you don't have to show an ID, you don't have to stop, you just drive on in. But when you can't come back in that way unless you have a passport or a green card or something like that. But that's one of the places that they've really secured the fence. On the Mexico side, there's a lot of beautiful artwork, a lot of protest artwork and art of resistance, street art of resistance. One of the things that's very ironic, and you can see up on that hill, you can see that's where that fence is. So that's the US side. We're on the Mexico side right there. And you can see how much distance there is there. The cross that you see on the left is a memorial to a boy named Jose Antonio, who was 16 years old, and where you see people standing over right here. That's where that cross is on the wall. If you look in the background, up the hill, over the fence, where there's a security tower, a surveillance tower, there was a US Border Patrol agent standing on a platform where the surveillance tower is. And he said that Jose Antonio was throwing rocks at him. He shot and killed him. He shot him 7 times. Jose was on the Mexico side. He was just a kid. So the militarization of the police, like we've seen in the United States, is part of what's going on here, and also the militarization of the border. And another thing to know is that the border wall and the technology that's used for the surveillance towers and the infrared heat search that they use in the desert all along the border is all developed and manufactured by Israeli companies and has very similar, very similar to the walls between Palestine and Israel in different places. So of course, it's not just, I don't want to give the impression, it's not just Israel, it's not just the United States. The militarization of borders all around the globe is really big business. There's a lot of money to be made by making people fear their neighbors. So once again, I was standing right at the place where Jose Antonio was shot when I took that picture, and you can see where the White Tower is new, but they had a tower there that went up over the fence. The fence was the existing fence there when he was shot, and the guy was not, he was prosecuted. He was the first Border Patrol that's ever been prosecuted for a crime like that, but he was not convicted. So these are more protest things on the Mexico side. Yes, Peggy.
Did Mexico do anything about that situation?
I will have to research that more. I honestly don't know. That's a really good question. And I do think there may be still some suits that are pending, as this was fairly recent. You can see a lot of candles. Those are little painted on the iron bars of the fence. They have times when people meet with their loved ones, because this is in the middle of the town, Nogales, and you know, like grandma lived on the other side in the neighborhood across, so people still meet there. And one of the protest things is they'll have people who do mountain climbing and rappelling climb the wall there, which is not that hard to do. So again, the ridiculousness of the wall. But the terrain in the border north of Nogales, this is kind of what it looks like. And my class, did you do a water drop when you went? Yeah, so going out into the desert and leaving water jugs for people who are crossing is something that we do when we go there. And this is a marker that's along one of the trails. This is way out, you know, a couple of miles off the highway where a lot of people cross, and you see little mementos like this in different places. So leaving water jugs is really, really important. There's a lot of documentation of water jugs like this being destroyed by Border Patrol. There's an organization called No More Deaths. That is the group that helped us go out and leave the water jugs, and their work is really important and interesting too. I want to stop this part of the presentation by mentioning an organization called the Southern Border Community Coalition. It is a coalition of people across all of the states in the United States that border with Mexico. And it's a combination of religious leadership, law enforcement, civic leaders, humanitarian aid workers, people coming together to try and come up with sane policy suggestions to make it better. And I've got some copies of their 12-page report out on the table out there if you're interested in that. There's also a page of resources. But they have a really wonderful vision of promoting human dignity and reasonable laws, and doing that in a way that can help communities have input into what's going on in their own area. So I'm going to stop there and pass it back to Mary and see, we may be ready for questions. I don't know. You have more you want to do right now? Oh, I was going to do the migrants for sale thing. Do we have time to do that? Do you want to do, you think we do? Okay. I'm just going to do about 4 minutes of this, so let me see if I can figure out how to do it. I really recommend watching these, all of these videos, but we're not going to take time to do that now. We're just going to watch a short part of it.
In the state of Arizona, this is legalized racial profiling.
The detention of migrants is a multi-billion-dollar industry.
One in which immigrants are traded like products.
They are for sale to the highest bidder.
Who benefits and who profits? Corrections Corporation of America, or CCA, the GEO Group, and the Management and Training Corporation combined own over 200 facilities in the nation.
With over 150,000 bed spaces for a total profit of close to $5 billion per year.
Private prisons profit like a hotel. The more occupants that go in, the more money comes out.
You just sell it like you're selling cars, or real estate, or hamburgers.
Private prisons rely on anti-immigrant laws that guarantee them access to fresh inmates.
Here's how they do it. The American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC, is an extreme right-wing membership organization comprised of state legislators and powerful multinational corporations, including the Corrections Corporation of America.
ALEC is the most active private prison lobbyist group pushing for anti-immigrant laws like Arizona's SB 1070.
Russell Pierce, like CCA, is an ALEC member, one with obscure ties to national white separatist neo-Nazi groups. During an ALEC meeting, CCA and Pierce crafted a model legislation that became, almost word for word, Arizona's SB 1070.
Whether people are undocumented or not doesn't matter.
As long as they fill the detention facilities for days, months, or even years.
SB 1070 and their copycat laws sprouting up across the country represent the perfect money machine.
Take a picture.
I am. Oh, I love you.
The hardest thing for me is just watching Logan go through really hard emotions, get like aggressive behaviors. It's hard to see my husband behind glass, but it's even harder to see the pain that it's causing my son. he was sent an order of deportation to the wrong address. We didn't realize.
That video, if you're interested, watch the whole thing. Mary, I'm going to pass it back to you.
So what I keep hearing is, why are so many coming at this time? Why are they coming at this time? Why are they coming at this time? I think there's two things going on. They understand that there's going to be a change of administration. They truly believe that it will change. And they remember what it was like under the previous administration. So they want to make sure they get here before the administration does change. Even, from talking from people, they're pretty smart. They know what's going on. Even if that didn't happen, they know it's an election year for America. They know that President Biden is being pressured to do something about this huge problem. And they've already started talking about how to do, they're working on several different things, like limiting parole and asylum seekers' ability to stay here, to await their trial. President Biden has been talking to President Lopez Obrador, the president of Mexico, about the Mexico side using their military to help keep people from crossing. Mexico is actually there to keep people from coming back into Mexico. But he's been talking to them now about keeping people on the Mexico side from coming to the US. So it's military on both sides now, keeping people on the correct side. And so they know that there's a possible administration change. They know that Biden's getting more pressure, and he will start to make, and he has started to make some movement toward immigration and the changes, so that hopefully his election will be won. I think it's terrible that this issue is used for winning or losing elections. I think I posted, I don't think children of God are pawns in anybody's political game. They shouldn't be. And the other thing that is going on is they hear stuff. They hear what Americans are saying. Oh, they're bringing fentanyl. Oh, right now it's fentanyl. You know what? Weirdly enough, I didn't meet one person with fentanyl on them. Or I've never spoken to anyone that even knew anyone that was trying to carry fentanyl. The minute you cross, you get picked up. I would say people that actually make it into the desert are, what would you say, Kathy, maybe 8% of the people actually make it through the desert? Maybe? I don't know. It's like the minute you would cross with a big bag of drugs, you're surely going to get caught. Or if you're carrying 5, 10 people with you, if you're accused of being a trafficker, you're going to get caught. CBP and ICE are actually very good at their jobs. Their job is to catch people that shouldn't be there. And they know that they hear this stuff about them, and they're thinking, if we don't get in now, it's going to become so militarized, and it's going to be so changed that none of us will be allowed in. And so that's why people are rushing to get in. I think there was a story about Eagle Pass that said they saw maybe 4,000 in one day. Eagle Pass is a big deal, and it's, of course, being used by all the politicians. They already went down there, made a big speech. The Speaker of the House was, talking about all the fentanyl and the crime and all the drugs, and they're all, terrible people trying to get in. I can assure you that the prisons in those countries do not fling open their doors and let their prisoners free to come into America. They don't do that. That's not true. They want to keep their prisoners because that's what you do. You keep your prisoners and you make their life as miserable as possible. They're not sending their prisoners to us. They're not sending the drug dealers to us. You know how drug dealers travel? You know how terrorists travel? In perfect comfort. They travel over here on planes with student visas, right? The people crossing the border actually are not the big villains that they are being made out to be. But when you do that, when you paint that kind of picture, it wins and loses elections. They know that. They know they have a target on their back. Now, what a lot of people in the US are saying is, well, they're using this asylum thing as an excuse. They're not all asylum seekers. They're not all fearing for their life. Maybe not. But there's a whole bunch of other reasons why you need to flee your home. So there's like this huge list, and we're just going to show them real quick to you so that we can take some questions. There's classification migrant. That's a person who comes over because they've been given a visa, they've applied. You can't apply when you're on the border. Your access to a computer is difficult, even if you could. How are you going to finish a 14-page application in a language you don't know? It'd be like I handed you something in Swahili that was 14 pages long, and you didn't have access to a computer and you didn't have a credit card to pay for that application anyway. An application costs money, by the way, if you've ever tried to apply for something. An asylum seeker is someone who has not yet been told you can stay in the US. They haven't had their hearing heard, but they can be released and stay in the US until their hearing. A refugee is a person who has had to flee their home for many reasons. And so there's lots of these reasons. And I've heard some awful stories. I know Kathy has. People burst into tears and they tell you the terrible things that's happened to them. They're not kidding. Drug dealers aren't messing around if they say, I'll kill you and your family. The military and the police aren't kidding when they say, I will kill you and your family. They don't have a choice but to run. So there's all sorts of reasons why people have to leave. They're living in poverty. Or as Kathy was saying, decades ago, there were migrant workers sending money back home to their families. Natural disasters. People get their homes blown away and they never regain them. War. We have tons of refugees worldwide because of war. They suffer violence, murder, kidnapping, torture. That's all at the hands of military, police, government officials, their own countrymen. So a lot of people suffer persecution for all sorts of reasons. Because they worked on the wrong campaign, their political association, their religion, their gender, their LGBTQ+, other serious circumstances. Targets. I don't know if you remember much about Castro and Cuba when he took over in his targets. Political opponents. Well, we've already had someone threaten to go after their political opponents, right? Human rights workers, teachers, clergy, social workers, doctors. They are targets because they have influence with big groups of people, and so a totalitarian regime, a dictatorship, they fear those people. Fidel Castro went after those people, teachers, pastors, social workers. It could happen easily. Lawyers, community leaders. And so they have all kinds of political violence that they face, often just because of their race, their ethnicity, their nationality. When you move from place to place and you're not actually from that nation, you're not liked in any nation when you're a refugee. There's all sorts of human rights violations. Like I said, awful stories, violence, murder, kidnapping, more persecution for all sorts of reasons. I know a woman who, her sister was raped, their family dog was shot in front of them, and they told the sister, you tell your sister to leave, or we'll do the same thing to every member of her family. The only crime she committed was that she worked on an opponent's political campaign. It's true. This stuff really happens. Kathy mentioned the special need for LGBTQ+ people. Women suffer untold violence. The stories I've heard, I wouldn't even be able to repeat. Religion. We know in Guatemala, and our friend John Deere has talked about the nuns and the priests there that have been murdered. And you would be murdered too if you go visit their grave. So, Kathy's not kidding. I'm not kidding. Our friend John Deere isn't kidding. All of these people that I've talked to, it's not fake. They aren't just making up stuff to try to get into the US to be in a country of people that, for the most part, don't want them here anyway. So, okay, so that's it. Did you have anything? Do you have anything to add? I'm so happy that Kathy has come tonight. She is such a wealth. of information, and she's been taking those seminary trips to Nogales 9 years, 4 trips. And I bet every one of them was unique and different, and again, you meet beautiful people that have terrible, terrible stories. So I think we can let some questions come at us. Okay. Oh, hang on. Yeah, we have to have a mic.
We've got Tina and Beth on Zoom. Jordan, do we have anybody else on? Okay. They won't hear you unless you're talking to them.
I know that well. Hi, Tina and Beth. But my question is, Kathy said that the asylum hearings are like so long. How did our Kasanga family get in so soon?
By the grace of God. I don't know how that happened. The attorney was as shocked as the rest of us were. Their application was heard and granted within 2 years. And I don't know, maybe it was because I was laying at night praying that this would happen. Maybe it's because all of you were praying every night that this family, this beautiful family that had suffered untold terrible events, would be accepted and they would be able to work. It's a huge financial burden to support a family. And prayer. That's the only reason I have. I don't know. It was a miracle. Miracles still happen, my friends. Miracles still happen.
Anyone else have a question?
Thank you both for your wonderful presentations. I should read about this. I don't know if you'll know, but I'm wondering, like, when they're coming up, not from Mexico, but from Guatemala, they're going through Mexico. So what's happening in Mexico? And is it like probably filtered down and some people stay in Mexico, or is Mexico as antagonistic as we are and say, get out and you've got to keep going, or what? I mean, you get my question.
Mary, our family started out in Argentina and then they trekked. Did they walk all the way, or what did they take?
They walked, they took buses, they hitchhiked. Yeah, they did all of that to get up here. So there's and the reason why they left Argentina was because of racism. They said Argentina is worse than America, and they were in danger in Argentina. So they made their way to the Mexico border. So I'll let Kathy.
I don't know a whole lot about that. Another really good documentary is entitled The Beast, and it talks about the train that runs all the way through Mexico from south to north, and many, many immigrants ride on the top of the train to get through Mexico. There are a number of church-related ministries in Mexico that I've visited, some that are doing the same kind of work, trying to help migrants south of the border. And the government of Mexico is pressured more and more by the United States to do things to keep refugees from Latin America to stay in Mexico. But Mexico is a very poor country and they don't have a lot of work. And a lot of the workers come. There's a really good book by David Bacon entitled The Right to Stay Home. Again, this is on the resource list that I put it on the table, that talks about how NAFTA has allowed corporations to do, like, say, meat processing and stockyards and stuff that just destroys communities in Mexico, environmental impact and communities and jobs. So I don't know all of the answer to your question, but there is more and more pressure on the Mexican government to do things to keep migrants in Mexico.
They also have toughened the border at Guatemala so that you can't get through Guatemala to Mexico. There's a route that they take called the Darien Gap. That's very dangerous through South Central America to Mexico. And they've started to try to put borders and guards along that gap, that route, to stop people from moving.
There also are a lot of people making money off of working as coyotes, guides who promise to take people through Mexico and get them into the US. And it used to be, a few years ago, it cost $2,000 to $3,000 for one person. Now it costs about $10,000. And in the first documentary that I showed you, that kid from Guatemala who did make it home and survived, talked about how they had mortgaged their home in Guatemala to get the money to send him up here so he could make some money and help the family.
Anybody else? I thought this was funny. I saw this today. I got it from the Lost Doggo, which is a source of a lot of my news. I work on the death penalty, and we have 2 Republican legislators that we work with that are seeking a moratorium, but we can only work with them on one issue because they're on all the other issues. Justin Humphrey's one of them. Lost Doggo calls his bill the Only Hispanics Are Apparently Terrorists Acts. And he has written a bill that says any person who is of Hispanic descent living within the state of Oklahoma who is a member of a gang and has been convicted of gang-related offenses will be deemed a terrorist. Just picks out Hispanics to do that.
It's clearly a racial issue. We might as well just not even
there's no dog
continue
whistles
to deny
anymore.
it. It's racial. And even in Mexico, the darker your skin is, the more you're disliked. It's called colorism. So if you're more Spanish descent and you're more whiter, you're more accepted, you have more status than indigenous people who would be darker. So Mexico's not exactly a safe place for dark-skinned people either. I mean, we think everybody there is dark-skinned, but they aren't.
I'll say just one more thing, and that is in response to a question like, well, what can we do? And I think doing trips is one wonderful thing we can do, just to learn more. And I just so appreciate what Mary has done recently and different opportunities to do that kind of thing. It's not that bad of a drive even from here to South Texas, or even into Arizona or something. But there are other things we can do as well. And it has to do everything with our voting and our just sharing information with our neighbors about policies and things. Also, of course, sending money, sending food, sending coats, sending supplies. So I'm highly interested in being a part of a trip that goes down. I love to go down to the Brownsville area or Del Rio or those kinds of places. I think it's very, very manageable to do that. So keep me on the list when you all plan things like that.
Absolutely. So I totally appreciate Kathy and, like I said, the wealth of knowledge she brings. And she was just responding to my Facebook post, which I don't know how to do. Everybody else has to do it for me. And I said, oh, that's right. You know as much about immigration as anyone else on these issues. So come join us. And we definitely will be taking a trip. So if you're interested in that, we will do it. We will start planning it now. Please bring coats, and more coats. There's a list out there. You can always make donations. You can always send by Amazon. And we really need only the things we ask for, because it's too difficult to store things that aren't needed. And we don't have the people power to sort through items that we don't need. So there's a list for anyone who's interested. And if you're out there, you listen to this recording later, you just contact us and we will definitely sign you up and let you help in any way you want. Thank you so much, Kathy, for being here. Thank you all for coming out on a cold night, a very cold night. Talk to your friends. Talk to the people who have different ideas than you. When you hear someone say, oh, they're taking all of our jobs, say, no, they certainly aren't. They're poor and they're uneducated. They are not coming here to take your jobs. When you hear them say, oh, they're all murderers and rapists and drug dealers, say, no. No, I know women who have met those people. It is not true. Say it nicely so that you don't get harmed. But, it's a hard conversation to have because it's so politicized, but it's very important. So please, talk to other folks. All right? Thank you so much for being here. God bless you. Vaya con Dios. Gracias, mil gracias, which means 1,000 thanks, and go with God.